Hi, everyone, and welcome back to our book chat on Samira Ahmed's This Book Won't Burn. This is our second night of our conversation. If you are joining us, you can find us on whatever live stream you're watching us on now. So if you're watching us on YouTube, Facebook Live, or Instagram Live. And if you comment there, any of your thoughts on chapters 17 through 34, please share, talk along with us. We'll bring some of your comments in as we talk together. And once again, I'm joined by colleagues, friends at the TheEdCollab as we talk chapters 17 through 34. So without further ado, we can jump right in.
Okay, so I would like to start where we left off last time, because when we talked about what we were kind of looking forward to, one of the things that Lois said was she wanted to know where the romance was going to go. So things have progressed a little bit in this next section. What are you thinking about? What team are you on? Have you made a decision?
I am torn. I want to be, with Andrew because there's some comfort, there's some understanding, but I feel like she has to help him grow, and there's some things that she shouldn't be doing the lifting for. It's like obvious right in his face. But then there's also comfort in familiarity, right? So on the other side, they both share, religion, culture, food. Like it's just such a natural fit. So it's almost like that's like a safe, familiar choice. I'm like, well, do you want safeness and like safety and familiarity, and it's like you don't have to explain anything and it's just smooth, or do you have to like teamwork in progress? So it's like team safe familiarity and then teamwork in progress. That's where I'm at. I'm torn.
Yeah, I'm torn too, because I don't know. Well, first of all, when I was reading this last section, I was like, there was a part where I think at the end of chapter 23, when they were at the magical pond in the woods under the moon. And I wrote this post-it note about Andrew. I was like, boys do not exist in real life. But I know that's just my experience. But I gotta say, with Faze, that's how we pronounce his name, right? Faze. His cooking, I like a person who can cook. And I like the dark eyes kind of thing, and how it's sort of awkward a little bit with them. But I think you're right, Lois, in that it would nag at me to constantly feel a slight disappointment in Andrew and how he's reacting to his friends.
I need to defend soft boys. I think that there are men that exist, present company perhaps included, that are romantics and probably would go to the woods. So, but I think Samira's written just these cute, dreamy scenes for both of them where it's hard for us as readers to choose one. I mean, like the going out in the woods in the dark of night, which by the way, most of the time she was like, "Are you trying to murder me?" And that's where I think the soft boys would maybe be a little more cautious of like, well, okay, I know this is scary, but here's where we're going. So I will fault him for that. But that scene where they also, Andrew opened up more to her, and so she opened up more to him, felt like this beautiful connection. And then you fast forward to this dreamy cooking scene where everything couldn't be any better. And then yeah, I don't know. And they both are complicated. I don't know what to make of it. I can't decide which team I'm on. I want her to be with both of them, which also isn't fair to either one of them. So I don't know.
But she even said when she was with Andrew, she's like, I can forget about like all of the like drama that's going on. Like I can just kind of pretend like it's not happening because she keeps saying it's so lovely you get the privilege to not have to talk about that at dinner. Like good for you. But then she's also kind of like leaning into that. She's like, I can forget some of these things when I'm with him. And so then FaZe comes over and cooks, and that was it for me. I was just like, all right, that's like 5 more points for him. I just loved that
You're
scene.
keeping score.
In some kind of intangible way, yes. But he just like took the lead with that whole scene, and I just could see it like on screen as if it were a Netflix series. Like this whole, and the sister comes in and out, and like I loved it. I loved it.
I know. I was thinking about phase 2 though, in the sense of I kind of feel bad for him. Like Andrew's like definitely like the proactive, he's creative, he has the confidence, he knows what he wants and he's gonna get it kind of thing. And FaZe has maybe the same feelings, but he's like still within that, trying to be within the boundaries of the culture and religion and he's trying, and then she's all like, she totally like ruins the moment because she's nervous too. And so I feel for him. I feel like he wants it too and wants that connection. And he's just not as like in your face about it as Andrew.
Well, and Andrew comes over and is like, Saturday gear to put together this little free library. You can just see it, like him busted his like paint splattered old T-shirt and like baggy jeans. I mean, yeah, poor FaZe. I mean, he just doesn't stand a chance. But I'm still team FaZe. I am still team FaZe.
And I do have to point out, I do like that she has a Daisy boy who's into cooking and who is like, not just into cooking like a hobby, but like is taking it seriously and is being, going to culinary school and being recommended by this popular chef. And so I like that touch for FaZe. That's different.
One detail I was hung up on I couldn't let go of is I felt like the paint dried too fast for them to put the books in. It's such a small detail. Right? I was like,
wait.
No, they need more time before the books are going to have paint on.
Yeah. And okay, so I have two grown children now. I don't know how that happened, but they're both college age now. And I'm also thinking, not to, harp on this forever, but between the two love interests, I'm also thinking about college, and FaZe seems like someone who would stick it out no matter where they both end up going, if that's what they end up doing. And he goes to culinary school. But Andrew, I don't know, that I think it might be hard. So I don't know. We'll just have to see, I guess.
Are you planning their lives for them? Is that what?
Oh, yeah, that's what I do. I have parasocial relationships with people in books and television and movies because I have a hard time in real life. So.
Beautiful.
I love that. I think when we were mentioning points, I think Andrew definitely got the points when he decided to go to do a group prom date. I thought that was cool.
And I'm stuck too in, I love her and I get that it's young love. She's figuring out relationships. She's trying to figure out where she is. So I can't fault her. At the same time, but I think she's clear with this too. It feels like she's leading them both on. Like she's not being clear, and perhaps she doesn't know either. Like I can't say that she's like intentionally doing this. So I don't know. It's the complexity of love in general, I guess. But I want to pick a team so that she also can stop hurting one of them. So I wonder if there are many things we were discussing as topics to go into, and around everything about relationships. Perhaps we open up the bubble a bit more to friendships, and the different ways that the friends are interacting around them. There's many places we could go. We could go into Andrew's friendship group and thoughts around that, or perhaps Noor's friendship group and the ways they're supporting each other and her. I don't know if there's a topic that any of you want to jump into.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with James. Every time he's in the scene, my anxiety level rises. I'm just like, what jerky thing is he gonna say or do, or like just what awful stereotype is he gonna perpetuate? I mean, he's just the worst. And it's just, how can Andrew be friends with this kid, And like, I mean, he says he called him out at the Dairy Queen, right? Like, but it's just like, how do you, like, that it can't be the first time James has acted like this. I mean, clearly it isn't because of the history with FaZe. But it's just like, we've talked a little bit about how these characters are very complex, and she's really humanizing them. They're not one dimensional at all. But it's oh, James, I just can't with anytime he's in the scene. I just want to. Well, and actually, I think she says it. I think Nora says it. Something about his face, like just begging her to punch him, and she's like, "I might just do it." I was like, "Yes, please, for all of us." I don't condone violence, but I mean, come on, James.
He was really irritating, and I think Andrew irritated me even more. In like in the previous chapters when we see James and how he is not friendly. He like you can like to me he's just I don't trust him. And Andrew, like, makes excuses. Like, oh, he doesn't mean it. Oh, it's just humor. And it's like, at which point, Andrew, like, would you start really reflecting on his words and the behaviors of the people around you? Like, you say that your stepdad's action is not a reflection of you. Don't hold me accountable. Blah blah blah. You fight for that distinction, but then when it comes to James, just because he was there for you in one moment, it's almost like that's clouding your judgment. You're just as how you can, see your stepdad for what, like who he is. Why can't you see James for what he's doing? And the constant excuses. Yes, he stood up at the Queen. Yippee. I mean, but then if he did not, then he'd be a jerk, right? So it's like you like this girl. It makes sense to be like, come on, that was too far, but what's next? When will you hold James accountable? When will you realize that this is just not meaningless jokes and he's just being whatever? And I feel like a lot of the times we come into these tense situations, people make excuses and they try to brush things under the rug when no, you have to call it out and address it.
I think that's so true, Lois, how you mentioned how he's like critical of his stepfather and vocal about him, and and not the same towards James. Like he's kind of like, well, he's been there for me during the hard times.
Yeah, and I'm curious, did Andrew pick up one of these books to read? Like when she told him about FaZe and the food, right? Like, oh, he's mad about that. Like, yeah, those things for someone of FaZe's background is just more than a simple, oh, your food's gross or your food smells. Like that's a microaggression. Well, a macro. Nothing's micro anymore, right? And so I'm just like, Andrew, have you read a book? Like, are you really diving into what this girl you like is about, and are you really understanding why FaZe would be mad at you for making those comments?
I
Yeah,
wonder. Oh,
no,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. No, you
I
go ahead, Chris.
I wonder if that, like, if we go out to craft, like think like, so why does Samira have James in this story and that friend group in general, but James seems to be the most obvious. But there were the other friends who were taping and taking photos, and then someone's working on that op-ed. I wonder if it's partially a like we have families and friends, we have people that we care deeply about who they're a part of our family or they're chosen family in a way that James seems to be, who have problematic views. And it can be hard to figure out, what do you say to that? Like I feel like it's easy for me to bring things up in like a professional setting like that. I can do well, but when it comes close to friends, it's a little bit easier, and then family, it's the hardest of all. Like how do I say something to aunt, uncle, or whoever? And I wonder if Samira is giving us James both to show complexity in relationships, but also because like someone had pointed out the last talk, it's kind of a how-to in a way too. If there's gonna be maybe coming up, but like how to, so what do you do when someone is close to you, they do mean a lot to you, and it's really uncomfortable, the things that they say or do? How do you approach that without damaging that relationship, or at least having the fear that you would, perhaps? I don't know.
I agree, and I think we don't do enough to help young folks navigate those kinds of conversations. And one of the things that this all reminds me of, I feel like James is a very much it's just a joke kind of dude. He's like that whole it's just a joke is really, especially kind of it keeps coming up for me because I'm in the process of researching a lot around humor. And one of the books that I've read recently that is so amazing that would, for I think adult readers, professional readers might make a good paired text is a book by Raul Perez. It's called The Souls of White Jokes, and it looks at how racist humor has these very real consequences, and where does that whole idea of it's just a joke, why can't you take a joke, how deep does that go in our US history especially, and what can we do to push back on that? So I think a lot about that because I think in the real world of high school and middle school there's a lot of that kind of stuff happening, and how do we call those people in um, around this whole idea was like, oh, you can't take a joke when it's really doing, some of the micro macro aggressions that they're making are doing really enormous harm. It's like the drop of water that, one drop doesn't erode, but a lot of drops over time erodes and does real harm.
And the joke, it's just a joke he's trying to cover up. Meanwhile, he's taking video to share with someone to get her singled out. Like he has malice. He's trying to hide it, but I really appreciate that perspective of how are we helping adults, but young people see and navigate those kinds of relationships, and how do you step in?
I'm curious in the dynamics of the town because her little sister seems to be protected. Her friends are there surrounding her, and they're at the same school, they're in the same town. Um, Whereas at the high school or the upper grades, they are more brutal. The graffiti, the vandalism of the lockers, their reaction to her at Dairy Queen, all of those things. It just seems like how does that happen, right? How does Amal get this safety in the same environment, and Nor doesn't necessarily have that. Um, and then what I appreciate is like you get to hear some of the experiences of the other marginalized students. Like you had the black student, we have other students showing up at the lodge, and they're sharing their experiences, and it's not a one-off. This is something that happens all the time in this town, but Amal seems to be protected. So it's interesting to see the differences there.
Well, and what role do the adults, play in that with the
Correct.
principal? I mean, clearly targeting her. And she says, she acknowledges like he accomplished exactly what he set out to do, is would put a target on my back. And like just his whole like, the like approaching her in the hallway, like his whole like
Hmm.
the wide-legged stand. It was like a showdown, like Western, right? Like, and then he's just it's just so gross, but it's clearly like a model, like it shows all the other kids like what is acceptable in this place. And then there's a locker incident, and then he turns it around on her and is like, well, maybe, what did you do? Let's think about what you did. Or maybe, perhaps even you did it to get attention. It's just so despicable, but it all kind of feeds into the culture there.
Right.
And, it shows the other kids in the community, like what is okay to do. It's like been condoned almost.
His story upset me a lot, where he told her
Yes.
about the ranch and the bull, that was very much a threat. I'm like, who does that? Which adults, even if you disagree with her beliefs around reading and policy, that is legit a threat to a child. And I often think about students who are speaking up about different things and the conversations they have with adults when adults disagree, like threatening a child versus having a proper conversation. And like you said, sizing her up in the halls, making sure she's a target. He doesn't care about her safety at all. And your job as a principal is to ensure a positive culture and make sure all your students are safe. And clearly, he has a track record of not caring about safety, because when she was like, "Oh, let me go tell him," you know, the friend circle was like, well, I don't know what might come off it, but it's alarming that, and it's true, right? We have adults in learning spaces that do not care about the safety of students, especially when that student represents the very thing they're trying to ban or not, allow in. And it's sad and alarming.
It makes me think of they changed prom to not have couples, so Juniper and other queer students can't bring anyone with them. Like, and all the disguised language that they use to cover it up. And yeah, to your point, I think of, and here he's making this very direct threat of a bull has horns, but the number of educators who use like going to the dean as a punishment and threat versus figuring out, well, what's happening in my classroom or in our system that's making you feel unsafe. Because yeah, maybe we see Noor as the actions she's taking are to try to speak up against something that's unfair. But there's a million different ways that students might do that, and they may have a million different skill sets around that. And some are calling out or acting up or doing something because they see unfairness in the room. But because it doesn't match what the adults want, it looks like it's a problem. And then you have a similar kind of reaction.
And I just think like somebody like Carter, like why is he why is he a principal? Like you're obviously like not placed in there. Like go be threatening somewhere else, It's just and it's interesting too how in the like he's in the story as Carter, not as Mr. Carter. So even that like I don't know if that was intentional or not, like to not give him the honor of that the formal title and just be Carter versus Miss Clayton has that, the Miss in front of her name, which I feel like in a way kind of honors her more. And it brings me to the place where, and I was so uncomfortable in that scene for many reasons of when he goes into the library and he like, the moment he shuts the door, I was like, that was like it like made the whole situation worse, the shutting of the door thing for me. And then I was thinking about the scene right before that and how she was with another student and like consoling that student and comforting them. And the realization that Noor has where she's basically like, Miss Clayton is the ally for these kids. And without her, who are they going to have? And it just reminds me of the importance of even us as educators and, in the times where I was at a school and teaching or just being there, that like the students go to the adults for that safety. They like search if they don't go proactively necessarily, but it's our responsibility to create that safe environment and that safe energy versus that threatening, scary, I'll save the words for that, for not online, somebody like Carter. And it just was such a important point of the importance of allyship and just kind of like, especially now, I feel like there's this, like, students are dealing with so much, and so much of it I don't think they can take home all the time, and I think providing that space is important.
So before we talk, we mentioned the last chat how in the book she gives us a lot of how to's, right? Like how to work around boundaries, right? And then what I appreciate with the story with Miss Clayton is that, like you said, she is a safe space. There are a lot of teachers on campuses that are safe spaces for kids, because especially when a school is like, the leadership in a school is grounded in harmful beliefs, they need those escapes. And I like the fact that she did not back down, because we you and it's very, like, there's a privilege in not backing down, right? There's a privilege in being like, I'm gonna stand by my principles, and I don't care if I get fired. I'll be fine. And then it's like, I want to stand by my principles, but I also have a family. I have these things. What am I gonna do without a job? Um, and so I appreciate her taking that stand, but also bringing up the union, because she was like, let me get my rep here, let me have this. And that's like another how to. Like, she knew policy, she knew exactly what she was doing, who to go to, how to stand her ground, and that she was going to fight this. And sometimes not all educators are in unions, not all places, like sometimes you're in private settings, different states, whatever. um you're not always in a union, and you don't always know who to go to represent you and keep you safe. And so, like, you can be easily railroaded, you can be easily, like, afraid and just walk away and be like, all right, you guys win. But it was really, I really appreciated how Ms. Clayton responded to him, and her mentioning, like, we're not done here, this work is not done, don't worry about me, I'll be fine. And so it was like another how to for educators: when this happens, here's what you can do.
And it reminds me of lots of examples, but um, one that comes to mind is, it was Nerd Camp Long Island, I think, and there was one of the Ed Camp talks was about queer, and this was several years ago, but it was queer middle grade YA novels, and there were librarians in the room and teachers in the room, and others. And I remember there, and I wish I remember her name now, but there was one uh, library media specialist, who said, I used to take books that had queer characters, queer storylines, and I would just put them in places that kids knew they could find them. So even if my school environment didn't embrace it, it didn't feel safe to have them public, I knew places, and then kids began to know where those places were, so that they could find the books that they weren't allowed to read anywhere else. And that feels so similar to Miss Clayton, like being the book fairy in her locker and putting them there, and the way she put up QR codes, and just was like, no matter what I do, even though it's a quiet protest, I'm going to make sure you have stories that you need and you have access to them. And yeah, I found that powerful. And the way that she was doing that quietly, but then, like, the QR codes, she seems very smart. Of course, she knew that at some point someone who didn't agree with it would scan it and see what was going on. But all of them were small, brave acts that rippled into larger actions for kids.
And I think sparked the fire for Noor to get into the little free libraries. Like, okay, so Carter's gonna remove this source for us in our community, like, but we don't. That's not the end of it. It doesn't have to be the end of it. Like, we can get these stories in kids' hands, and of course, Andrew. Wait, who did the lodge? Who helped with the lodge? Faith.
Phase, yeah. Mhm.
And then Andrew helped build the little free libraries with her. So together they're still kind of spreading, that fire that Miss Clayton, you know, sparked for them in the building, which I love. Yeah.
It was
I was
oh, go ahead.
a little when I love Miss Clayton, but I was like, can she go into student lockers? I was like, even just to
Well,
put a book in?
the lock was broken.
I know, but
But yes, he's opening the locker. That's true.
I was like, and my little like, teacher brain, I was like, ooh. um, but yeah, there's just, I don't know, just this whole idea of this, I think it would be really cool for us. And we kind of talked about this privately before we came on here, but in the next session to just sort of think about what are those lessons learned, and what is Samira telling us through this story that we can take away from it in real life, because a lot of what's happening, I'm sure, resonates with a lot of people, yourselves included, and what your experiences have been, and what, going back to that idea of knowing your schools and your district's policies is so important, because one district policy that I'm aware of in my community is, if you pose a challenge to a text, you have to have read the entire thing. And yet, because our state's ed commissioner is, well, you can put a blank there. You can put your own word, but there have been schools in the area, in the community, that have been brought to task by him, specifically because one or two people have posed a question around a book and had not read the whole thing, or taking excerpts. And so I think the first question should have been, have you read it yet? Do you know the context? And then we can have a conversation. So I just think, it sounds so simple, know your schools and your district's policies, but it is really important, especially around this idea of banned and challenged books, for sure.
It reminds me of I can't remember how many gatherings ago, but it was recent, maybe it was last fall, the Freedom to Read Foundation, when Joyce was giving some examples of things that are important for us to be aware of and do. And that was one of them, of make sure that you have a clear process of what happens when there's a challenge, because there's so many ways that you can get ahead of things turning into what they turned into in this district that Noor is in now, by just having things like you said, like make sure that you have, did you read the whole book? And that there's a process of clarity around, so is it taken from a classroom, or does it first need to go through review? And then it's really, what are all of the steps that are involved? Because if you don't have that written out, then everyone is spinning their wheels or making up their own version, and you need those to exist.
And
It was go ahead.
I was just going to point out the quote from on page 176. I think that's chapter 26, where she says, "I place my palms face down on top of the book pile. Censorship and book bans are the dying gasps of democracy, but we still have to fight them with everything." And I think this just represents that overall censorship, that when when things begin to be controlled and censored, and we're losing like any sign of so-called claim democracy now. And not only that, but it's like on a for each individual where a book perhaps could represent them, they're essentially being banned, like that. They're being told, like, you are not allowed to be who you are. You will be banned if you exist as a person in this world. And for me, like, thinking about somebody who's just a child being told that from the beginning of, like, you don't belong, like, just like this book doesn't belong, you don't belong. And thinking about the slippery slope of that type of control and that type of censorship, not just for books, but for speaking up, for you're not, nobody's like, we're not safe. Like the kids are not safe. And that's how I really feel that way nowadays.
I really feel that with Juniper's experience too, and many in Noor's new friend group, but it's just your heart just goes out to Juniper because she's been like fighting this fight for, her whole life in this community, and has found little ways, around it with her, peer group, and we've talked a little bit about this too, about how it really is like, a how to for being an ally, and what to do to support your friends. Like when the article, when the op-ed is, written, and they're texting her and they know she's going to have a horrible day at school, like the target just gets bigger on her back. The text messages saying like, we're on our way to your house. I think it says 180. Like, we're on our way to your house right now, and she's like, no, I'm not even ready, and she's like, and they're like, no, we're driving to school with you because safety in numbers. And that was Juniper, because safety in numbers, because she knows, like, she has been through this before so many times, sadly. But it's just a great kind of beautiful moment where the friends kind of flock to her, and they, they're standing by her figuratively and literally. And there's still humor in it, and there's still like, that joy and hope, but it's also just so heartbreaking, because you just know, like, that both Juniper and Faith have, lived through this time and time again. But it's just that, how to be an ally when a friend is in crisis. And poor Noor, it's just constantly it's just constantly in crisis, one wave after another. But I just love that moment there, the text messages to her that morning.
And how she usually drives to school, so they're coming to her house so she can drive them all to school so they can be there together. Like, I love that detail too. It's not like, oh, hey, we're coming to pick you up. It's, we're going to find a way to help you get into the building this next morning together. That, yeah, I just find that, yeah, so touching and so powerful.
What, like, reading the comments that the kids left for the op-ed, again, it ticked me off because it's just like a perfect mirror of what's happening in our reality and how people respond to differences. It's always violence. It's always name calling. It's always going for the worst of the worst things to say, oh, you terrorist. I'm like, do you know what a terrorist is? Like, why is she a terrorist? Oh, they want Sharia law. I'm like, do you even know what Sharia law is? And just these little sound bites that they hear. Um, it's what we see. And I've always said, like, why is the first thing name calling? Why is the first thing violence? Like, why can't we just have a proper conversation without the insults? Like, you can say, nor I don't want to read this book because tell me why. She doesn't have to be a terrorist because she wants to go read um X, Y, and Z. And something I think Miss Clayton said about like the loudest voices, right? The system being built for the loudest voices. Um, it reminded me of a situation here in Texas where one school district, they were going through all these books, pulling it from the shelves, and meetings were getting really ugly, and the name calling and all of these things. And when they really scaled it all back, I think it was only two or three parents causing the uproar about these books, and they hadn't even read all the things. They just went to a certain group site, got the list, and decided, we're going to do all of these things to silence all of the other people. And it's just disheartening to know that there's more uh, people who want freedom to read than the noisemakers. But the way they know how to work the system, it seems like they're like kind of winning, if you will. Um, and that led me to like how interesting the choice was for her to use Monday's Not Coming um as the paired text in that moment, because at first I was like, wait, what does this have to do with anything, right? It kind of threw me for a loop because the others were very clear why they were pulled in. And then I sat back and I was like, well, they're silencing voices, right? And that's the same thing that happened there. They're making sure that these stories aren't seen, like Nora and her friends' voices aren't heard. We don't want their experiences shared with others. And so I'm like, that was clever. That working enough Mondays now coming is really, really clever and really hones in on the lengths people will go to silence voices.
To your point of it's just a small group. So I have too many post-it notes, so I was desperately moving through. But on page 178, 179 are where they have the comments that were left. And one thing a detail that stood out to me that I really appreciated is that granted, it's only a small part of the comments, but it's only a handful of people. So like Dogma 25 has 2 comments. Joshi 2023 has 2 comments. So to your point, Lois, perhaps there's more, but it's a vocal few who get to be anonymous because they're just comments. And I also felt like it can't only be kids. Like I felt like there's got to be adults or like Andrew's stepdad or like someone's also saying things. But in that anonymity, it's only a few people saying a lot of horrible things over and over and over again, which may not show everyone that's there. Which also, another thing I thought of earlier that I think matches this point is there was that point early on, I thought was it the English teacher that had that poster up of like, everyone's welcome here? Was it English class? I don't think we've heard much from the English teacher then since that. And I don't know if that was a choice, like here's someone who has a poster but isn't doing anything visible, or is it the context where they have the poster, but they maybe in a Ms. Clayton kind of a way are being quiet and subversive, but they just can't be vocal. I'm not sure, but there's small ways where it's a small group that can say horrible things, but there also can be a small group that says supportive things too. I don't know, that just stood out to me.
I'm interested to know when the mother's fight will come on. Like I understand what she's going through, but like to not understand why your kid is fighting for something that you would have under different circumstances supported, like at which point do you separate the brokenness of your husband leaving and and you reconnecting with the parent that she's used to, that fighting parent that she's used to? Because I feel like everybody should be in therapy. They all need therapy and they need to talk because clearly they're not okay at all. So like home life is not okay, but on top of Nor dealing with what she's dealing with at school, I'm just waiting. Mom, when are you going to like be that firecracker, right? And was all of that fire strictly associated with your husband, and so now that he's not here, are you bearing it because it's going to remind you too much of him? Like where do you begin to separate the two and really support her? um and yes, so I'm just curious to see where this evolves. Are they all going to get the help they need as a family, and then when will she step up and return to fighting and encouraging her? Because those are the values you instilled in her. And so to kind of quiet it because you're going through all of these things, it's just interesting to me.
Maybe that argument that they had, I was trying to find it, but that towards the end will shake her up a bit.
Yes, I was just trying to find that too. I think I found it on 232. Yeah, it starts on 231. Mom says, I don't know how to get through to you. And Nora's like, get through to me. She's like, this is how you and dad raised us. And Mom continues, like, we're supposed to be making a fresh start. What must these people think of us? You have an obligation to this family. And I love the next part. I explode. Exactly. And she goes on her whole thing. But yeah, and you hope that will start to shake her out of, this kind of, fog that she's been in ever since. She hasn't been cooking, right? Space comes over and, starts cooking, and, hopefully these little things will start to, bring her out of it. But it's so hard to see the mom like that, because, that's just not what she's been, right? And yeah.
And I think too that Noor reminds her a lot
Mm.
about her husband. Like, it's probably triggering for her, like when she even said, like, you used to read, or you used to love to read, I think. Yeah.
It touches on that, it's the airline, put your mask on first before helping others, that it's like, we know from her past descriptions of even her parents' relationship that these are the values of her mom. This is how she fell in love. This is what they do with their children. This is the work that she believes in. And she's going through a grief cycle herself. It's really hard for her to care for her kids in that way, which also makes me wonder about, like, there's that one moment where Amal, I don't remember exactly where, but I think it was towards the end of what we read, where Amal, like, says to Noor something like, you don't think that I'm as strong. You don't think I'm strong, but I am. And Amal's closeness with the mom, I wonder if Amal's more of a support than necessarily Noor has been. As we're getting toward just our last few minutes here, maybe we just name a few topics or things that we're looking forward to finding out, or threads that we're following. So it sounds like one is the mom, like, what's her process? What will her role be in these final chapters? Any other topics to throw out that we should keep our eyes on?
Andrew's growth. Like, when will he really truly see what's wrong with the friends, with certain actions? Because I feel like, right, I don't know, like, he's doing nice things, helping with building the libraries and the little stuff, but it's like, how deep into the fight are you willing to get? Kind of like, how we try to move between, like, an ally and accomplice. Like, where is his journey, and what is that going to look like? So I'm curious to see how Andrew grows on that journey, if he does.
Well, on that note, his stepfather and, like, this cliffhanger at
Yes.
the end of chapter 34, where North, she says, where the car, right, picks up the gravel, and kind of, like, gets right up on her. It says, it happened so fast, but I swear it kind of looked like Andrew's stepdad. Like, if it turns out to be the stepdad, like, how will she deal with that? How will Andrew, like, step in maybe, or step up? I think that will be very interesting, and should, like, kind of be the test, right, for Andrew. Like, what are you gonna do now?
And I'm interested to see, we have the growing camp of, the band camp. I'm interested to see, do adults get involved in that? Like, when do they become a part of it too? Does it just stay something that kids are attending? I'm curious to see where that goes.
A little bit that's not so serious, but I continue to be tickled by all of the pop culture references in this. As a pop culture nerd myself, I see you, Samira, and what you are doing. And there was a amazing reference to Mean Girls in this section that was just so funny. And I'm pretty sure she might be a Swiftie, because there's a lot of that I'm picking up on too. So I'm enjoying just sort of picking those out too, and just enjoying the sense of humor that's threaded throughout this too.
And the love decision. What's going to happen? We started with which team, which camp we're on. What's going to happen? Because I love Noor, but I'm going to get to the point where I'm just like, just make a choice, girl. Like, something's got to happen. It's not okay. I get that you're figuring things out, but you're going to hurt people. Come on. So I want to say it's frivolous, but it's not, like that. That's the thing that I love about the book too, is it's very human. It lives in the large struggles and power dynamics and issues that we're all crawling through for our entire lives, and also has all the very human levels of friendship and love, and trying to, like, none of us are capable of focusing on only one thing all of the time. We have all of the plates spinning. So I appreciate that she's maturing in love at the same time as she's maturing into taking a stand, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I feel like this is a good point for us to wrap here for this evening. So we will continue next week on June 20th to end the book. So if you haven't, or if you've been tuning in, but you haven't quite gotten to the pages that we're at yet, or maybe you already read ahead and you didn't want to spoil anything, June 20th is when we'll talk across the entire book when we get there. So this was so fun. I'm glad that we've had this time. I'm glad to be focused on reading a great book, reading YA, another book that I can talk about with students. So thanks to all of you for being a part of this. And thanks to all of you for tuning in. We will be back on the 20th. So we'll see you next Thursday. Good night, everyone.
Night. Thank
Good
you.
night.